Hello. In the last video, we created our project and did some setup. We also created our get endpoint for a single school. So in this video, we will go ahead and create the rest of the CRUD endpoints to finish off our school controller. After that, we can work on abstracting out the logic and the data operations. We'll do this using dependency injection. This will help us clean up our controller and have a clearly defined home for the different things we will be creating. So let's start by creating our CRUD operations in the controller. One thing I think I want to do is go ahead and remove this action. That way we can specify the routes in here. I'm also going to rename this to retrieve. And this will just help follow along with the CRUD terms. I want to create another get, which will just simply be an action result, and it will be of an enumerable school, and I will also name this retrieve. And this will just simply return from the application DB context dot schools. Alright, now let's go with our create method. So this will be an HTTP post, and this one's going to end up being asynchronous, so async task, and we'll be returning action result of the GUID. So we pass in a school, just like that, but instead of update, we're calling this create. So in the body, we'll pass in a school, and then after it's created, we'll pass back the GUID, the ID of the school. To add this to our database, it's just simply application DB context dot add, and I'm doing this asynchronous, so school. And then we need to save these changes, so just do await, and there it is. And then we can just return school ID, because that will now be populated based on adding it to the database. Next, let's work on deleting a school. So we'll use the delete verb, so http delete, and for this we are going to require an ID in the route that will say public async task. For this, we're just going to return action result, and yes, we're going to call it delete, and yes, again, we're taking in the GUID. And so the first thing we want to do is search the database for the school given the provided ID. So var school, and then just check if it's null. If school is null. Okay, however, if we did find it, we'll end up removing it. And then we can just return new no content result. Okay, the last one that we're missing is the update. So let's go public, or well, let's put in our attribute. And for an update, we'll use a put. And we're going to require the ID again. And this will be async task action result school. And we'll say update, and we will require that ID, but we're also going to require the school object. Let's make sure that the provided ID matches the ID in the school object they gave. So Now, we want to retrieve the actual school object from the database. So we'll say var, we'll just call this update school, and then we're going to end up doing the same thing we've done up here. And then we'll do another check, make sure that, you know, we've actually retrieved the school. So now we can actually make the updates. So to do that, we'll just say update school dot, we'll have to go through each of these and update it with the school data they passed in, except for the ID. So we'll say name, all we need to do from here is just await application db context dot save changes async, and then we can return school. Okay, so that takes care of all of our CRUD operations from our controller. Okay, so now that we're done with our CRUD operations, let's go ahead and abstract some of this out. The reason we're doing this is to clean up the controller and clearly define where specific operations and procedures should live. That way in the future, if we need to add more logic, it doesn't create a huge controller. We'll start off by creating a data service later, and it would probably make sense for this to live inside the data class library with the DB context. So I'll start off by going in here and I will create a folder called services. Okay, and inside of this folder, I'll create another folder called interfaces. Okay, so we'll now create our first service, which is going to be a generic service, and for this reason, I'm going to call it generic service. This will basically create some methods that we can implement, and it'll be made in such a way that it won't matter which object type we pass in. So I'll create an interface called generic service, make it public. Okay, and then inside of the parent folder, I will create a class called generic service. This too will be public, and this will inherit from generic service. Okay, so basically what we're going to end up doing is we're going to take this logic from using the application DB context and basically move it into this. So we can actually, I'll just take this, cut it, paste it in here, take that, and do that. And then we can create our CRUD operations in here, but make it in such a way that, again, it's generic. So to do that, we'll start off with our create. So I'll just say public async task, and we'll just say T, and we'll say create, and it'll take in type of T item. Okay. And this is easy enough. All we have to do is say await application db context dot add async, and it will, based off of whatever type it is passed in as, it'll know which table to add it to. So await, and then just save those changes, and then just return the item. Next, so we got the C in CRUD, we'll do the R for retrieve. And we're going to have two different retrieve methods. So we'll first start off with one where we'll pass in an ID and then pass back whatever the item is that they wanted. So to do this, it's public async task, and we'll be passing back whatever object they specified they want, which will come from here, and then we'll require them to pass in a GUID ID. Now, to get this back as the type that they're requesting, we need to just do some casting here. So we'll say return T, await, and then we can just say find async. Now there's an overloaded method here where we take a type and then the parameter. So for the type, we just do type of T, and then we can just pass an ID. Okay, that's all we need to do for that. Now this will give us one item, but what about when we want like the entire list of items? So to do that, we're actually going to have to create a virtual method which will override inside of a service that inherits from this. So we'll just say public virtual T retrieve T. And in here, we're just going to say throw new not implemented exception. Now we just need update and delete. So we'll say public for update, it's just async task T. So we'll hand back whatever item we're updating. We'll take in that item, and we're going to handle the logic inside of a business manager before we get to this point. So really all we're going to end up doing is just save changes async, and then just return the item. And then finally, our D and CRUD, we will have public async task delete T and T item. And then we just simply application db.remove the item, and then again saving changes there. Okay, and then we just need to update our generic service interface. So we'll go through here. Now this will allow us to do our CRUD operations regardless of the item that we're working with. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, you'll notice that we have two retrieve methods. One will behave as our retrieve all, and the other will specifically retrieve via the GUID that we pass in. You should also notice that the one without a parameter is virtual, which means we'll override it in our class that inherits from this class. And so let's go ahead and create a school service and interface for it. And we're going to have to inherit from generic service. That way, whenever we're using this service, we have access to those CRUD operations that we created in the generic service. Okay, and then we can go ahead and create our class old school service. And as mentioned, this will inherit from generic service and implement the iSchool service interface that we created. It's complaining because we need to pass in the application DB context to our base class. So to do that, just start the constructor, and then we'll pass in, and here it already knows that. Okay, now we can actually override our retrieve method. So we will start out override t retrieve t. And the reason why we're overriding this is because we want to pass back specifically from the DB set schools. So, and we're going to have to do some casting here because we can't just do return application DB context dot schools because it can't convert it. And you'll also find that we can't just cast it as type T. We have to add object in front of it. Okay, what's the problem here? Let's see, override public virtual T retrieve T retrieve T. Let's have spelled it wrong. Okay. Something I did, you should change inside your generic service. You need to make sure that that's not private and it's set as internal. Otherwise, your services that inherit from this won't have access to application DB context. Okay, so now we just need to make sure that we can use dependency injection for this school service. So go up to configuration, app services, and then we're going to create a new method in here called public static void add custom services, and it will extend the iService collection, but not the configuration. Okay. And we just want to do services.add scoped, and then we'll say iSchool service, school service. Those in. And of course, before this will actually work, we need to make a call to it. So just going to go back into our program file here, and up here where we say add default services, we'll also say add custom services. Okay, so before we start using our new service, let's create a business manager to handle any logic before we perform actions on the database. To do this, I usually create a business managers folder and a interfaces folder nested inside of it. Okay, and then I just create the school business manager and the interface for it. Okay, and then from here, we'll just inject our school service that we created. Okay, so now this will be where we house our logic for, any of the operations we're going to do for school objects. What we created inside of our controllers is what we're going to end up basically replicating into our business manager. So we'll have like a get all, and then get school by ID, and so on and so forth until we have all of these handled inside of the business manager. Let's just go down the list and start creating the methods that we need. In our controller, when we retrieve by a GUID, we do have some logic here. We check to see if it's null. If it's null, we return a not found object result, which we're going to end up doing the same thing inside of our business manager. So first, let's retrieve the school. And to do that, we can now just use our service, school service, retrieve. Now this one is the other retrieve method where we tell it we want a school, and here's the ID. Alright, so this one's pretty easy, just task, action, result, and we're returning the GUID, so they'll send us in a school object and then we just return the ID of that object. So create school async. Again, they're passing in a school. So we just say await school service create school. That's it. And then just return the school.id. Okay, so the same logic, basically. Let's copy that over. I'll paste it in here. We have update school. Instead of that, it's now school service dot retrieve school by ID. Check if it's null. Okay, so now we just need to add these to our interface. Now we can finally go through and update our controller to call these. We will want to replace that with iSchool Business Manager. Rename that to School Business Manager. This needs to be which reminds me, we need to add that to our configuration app services as iSchool Business Manager. Okay. Okay, so for the first one we have retrieve. So we just say get all. Okay, and it's basically going to act as a pass-through. So it's really simple. Just return await school business manager. Oops. Dot get school by ID. And then we have create await school business manager dot create school async school, and we need to return it. Then we have a, oh wait, what's going on here? Oh, it's because this needs to be a task. Okay, task. Okay, so for tasks, it's return await school business. Dang. School business manager dot delete school async ID. And then update. We just do return await school business manager dot update school async ID and school. Yes. Boom. Okay, so now we can just do a quick run through and test our endpoints, make sure everything works correctly. Let's rebuild it. Okay, success. Let's run it. Okay, so we see that we have all of our endpoints under schools, which are, it's all schools, which is fine because the only repeated RESTful verb here is get, but it's overloaded with the ID on the route. Okay, so let's run our first one, which if we run this one, we should get, I may have some stuff in my database just from testing, which I do not. Okay, so it came back empty, which is good. Okay, so let's go ahead and create one, and it gives us this example. So I'm just going to copy that, hit try out. Oh, it's already in there. I'm going to get rid of the ID, and I'm going to create one with the name of, this is actually the town I grew up in, Fairborn High School. Okay, we'll just say the high school. Don't know the address. It's in Fairborn, Ohio, 45324. Okay, so let's see. Execute. We get a 200 with a response of the GUID ID that was created for it. So I'll reset this or minimize it, and then I'll just execute that again, and we see we now have one item in our response body. Okay, in fact, let's create another one. We will get rid of that ID. We'll say Fairborn Primary School. I don't know, K-12. It's also in Fairborn. And I'll leave those as blank. This one. Okay, so we got that GUID back. Clear it out. Back up here. Let's execute this. we see we now have 2 items returned to us, one which has state and zip as null. So let's update this one. Okay, so I'm copying that, jumping over to the put. Okay, try it out. Throw it in there, make sure that we grab the ID, put it up there. I'm changing the state to Ohio, and the zip to. Okay. Oh, Airborne Primary School. Okay. Cute. Got a 200 back. The item. We go back up here. We rerun this. We now see that these are no longer null, so successfully updated. Let's see. Oh, we haven't checked our regular get or get by ID. Try it out. Okay, so we have our first issue. Not found. Did I? Oh, it's because that's not a real one, so that's good. I mean, it returned a 404 for one that was not found, and a 200 with the data for one that was found. Perfect. Okay. And then finally, we just check our delete. So up here, got the 2. I will pass in the GUID for the 1 here. Execute. We got a 204 back, which is no content. And then, so if we go back up here and we execute this again, we only get the 1 back. So perfect. So that's all for this video. I need to think about what we're going to do in the next video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.